Holden Keller's Italian leather shoes hit the cracked pavement of the old campus walkway like they didn't belong there anymore, and maybe they didn't. He hadn't been back to Emory University since graduation day 12 years ago, when he'd walked across the stage with a business degree and an idea that would turn into a multi-million-dollar tech empire. But now, here he was, standing in front of the same ivy-covered library, trying to remember why he thought coming back for alumni weekend was a good idea. Still standing, he muttered, eyeing the building like it had betrayed him by staying exactly the same. The sun was warm against his tailored navy suit. He'd flown in that morning on his private jet from New York and had his driver drop him off a block away. He didn't want attention. He wasn't here to shake hands and pose for photos. He was just curious, restless, hollow in a way money couldn't fix. He shoved his hands into his pockets and kept walking. The quad was buzzing with activity. Tents, food trucks, string lights being hung from trees. Someone was setting up a jazz band on the makeshift stage near the student union. Holden's eyes scanned the crowd and stopped. She was standing near the fountain, holding a worn leather sketchbook and looking up at the clock tower like it still meant something. The wind caught her hair, soft and golden brown, brushing across her cheek. She hadn't noticed him yet, but something about her profile felt familiar. Not just familiar. No way. Holden crossed the grass without thinking, not caring that he was stepping in a puddle or that someone from the board of trustees just called out his name. He walked straight up to her. "Elara," he said. She turned, her eyes widened, lips parted in disbelief. "Holden Keller," he laughed once, stunned. "You're kidding me. What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," she said, blinking fast. "You disappeared after graduation. No one heard from you again." "I started a company," he said. Then I blinked and a decade passed. Elara Delgado shook her head, still staring at him. "You look different," he offered. "Rich," she said bluntly, then laughed. "And yeah, different." Holden grinned, genuinely for the first time in weeks. "You look exactly the same, except better." "How is that even possible?" She rolled her eyes and hugged the sketchbook to her chest. "I came back for the same reason you probably did. Nostalgia, regret, curiosity, take your pick." He glanced around. "I never thought I'd run into someone I actually remembered." "Wow, charming," she teased. "I didn't mean it like that. You were unforgettable." The words slipped out before he could stop them. Elara's expression softened. "We were friends, Holden." "Yeah," he said quietly, "we were." They had been more than friends once, for a minute. A short, too complicated minute during senior year when he kissed her after a late-night study session and then disappeared for a week, panicked by how much he'd felt. She'd never brought it up again. Neither had he until now. "You want coffee?" he asked suddenly. "There's still a spot by the student lounge. I checked. It's not terrible." She hesitated for half a second, then nodded. "Sure, if you're buying." He held his hand to his chest. "Are you implying I can afford it?" Elara snorted. "You're wearing a suit that costs more than my rent." "You can afford it." They walked side by side across the quad. Holden watched her fingers trace the edge of her sketchbook, noticed the paint-stained cuffs of her denim jacket. "You still draw?" he asked. "Every day," she said. "I'm a freelance illustrator now, mostly editorial work. Magazine covers, children's books. Not exactly a cash cow, but it pays the bills." He nodded slowly. "You always said being creative was the only thing that made sense." She glanced at him, studying him. "What about you? You always said you'd build something huge." "I did," he said simply. "Started in a garage in Brooklyn. Now we've got offices in 5 countries. Elara blinked. "Wow," he shrugged. "Turns out relentless ambition pays well." She looked thoughtful. "Does it make you happy?" Holden didn't answer right away. "Sometimes." They reached the cafe. It was still run by the same couple who'd owned it back then. The smell of espresso and old wood felt like stepping into a memory. They sat at a tiny table in the corner, 2 lattes between them. "So," Elara said, sipping hers. "No wife, no kids." Holden shook his head. "No time," she raised an eyebrow. "That's a choice, not a schedule problem." He couldn't argue that. "What about you?" "Nope," she said. "Though my mom keeps trying to set me up with her dentist." He laughed. "Tempting." "Right," she said, grinning. "But I like my teeth crooked." They talked for over an hour about everything and nothing, college stories, wild professors. The time Elara got locked in the art studio overnight and Holden brought her pizza through the window. The time he nearly failed Econ and she tutored him through the night. "I forgot how easy this was with you," Elara said, her voice quieter now. Holden looked at her, really looked. She hadn't changed in the ways that mattered, still witty, still grounded, still Elara. He leaned forward. "I don't want this to be a one-time thing," she blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've got events to attend this weekend, dinners, a gala tomorrow night. Come with me." "To a Millionaire's gala," she said, teasing but surprised. "Yeah," he said, "as my date." Elara hesitated. "I'm not asking for anything complicated," he said quickly. "Just, I want to see you again, properly, no disappearing this time." She bit her lip, thinking, then she smiled. "Well," she said, "I do have a dress packed." Holden felt something shift in his chest, something real. "Then it's a date," he said, trying to keep it casual. But nothing about this felt casual anymore. The gala was held in the newly renovated glass atrium hall, a sleek, modern structure that hadn't existed when either of them were students. Elara stood beneath the arched entryway, her heels sinking slightly into the red carpet that stretched toward the crystal-lit staircase. She tugged at the edge of her black silk gown, the one she only ever wore to weddings or art openings with free wine. Holden was waiting at the top of the stairs. She recognized him instantly, and not just because he stood out like a sculpture in a museum. His tuxedo was tailored within an inch of its life, his jaw freshly shaven, his hair swept back with deliberate ease. But there was something else, an alertness in his eyes, like he'd been scanning the room for her since the moment he'd arrived. "You look like trouble," he said as she reached him. "I thought you liked trouble," she replied. "I like you more." She didn't reply to that, not yet. The moment they stepped inside, flashes from discreet photographers caught them like moths in a chandelier. Holden barely blinked. He placed his hand on the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd like he'd done it 1,000 times, and maybe he had. "Elara, this is Nadine Caldwell," he said as they approached a silver-haired woman in a floor-length navy gown. "She's the current dean of business. Nadine, this is Elara Delgado." The woman's expression flickered with recognition. "Ah, the Holden Keller whisperer," she said, her tone light but precise. "Didn't you help him pass advanced finance?" Elara glanced sideways at Holden. "I prefer to think of it as academic collaboration," Nadine laughed. "Well, whatever it was, it worked. He's our favorite success story now. Though he's stingy with guest lectures, aren't you, Holden?" "I'll make up for it," he said smoothly. "Maybe even next semester." Nadine nodded, already moving on. "Don't vanish again." They crossed toward the balcony, the city skyline spread out below them like a sea of diamonds. Elara leaned against the railing, the cool wind brushing her collarbone. "You know everyone in there," she said. "I know their investments," he corrected. "That's different. But they know you. They talk to you like you're a brand." Holden loosened his collar slightly. "That's the job. Make yourself the product. Keep going until you can't remember where the real version ends." She turned to him. "Do you remember?" His gaze didn't waver. "Tonight I do." A violin quartet played something slow and aching in the background. Couples moved past them, some laughing, others whispering behind champagne flutes, but there was a stillness between them, a pocket of quiet that felt rare. "You disappeared after that night," she said softly. "The one in the library." Holden exhaled. "I thought about calling 100 times. But I kept thinking if I started something with you, I wouldn't stop, and I couldn't afford that back then." "You were scared," she said. "I was selfish," he admitted. "I thought if I could build something big enough, fast enough, I could come back and fix everything later. And now, I'm here," he said, "and I don't want to fix anything. I want to start something new." She studied his face, searching for cracks. "What happens when you leave again?" "I won't." "You don't know that." "I do," he said, voice low, "because I've had everything I ever wanted except this." Elara opened her mouth, but a tall man in a charcoal suit interrupted them. "Holden," he said, extending a hand. "We need you for the donor photo," he glanced at Elara, "and bring your date. The alumni magazine loves a good story." Holden didn't look away from her. "Give me 5 minutes." The man hesitated, then nodded and disappeared into the crowd. "You don't have to prove anything," Elara said. "I'm not," he said. But I am going to introduce you to the woman who runs the National Art Fellowship Board." Her brows lifted. "What? She's here tonight. I saw her on the guest list. You told me last time you wanted to work on a gallery series. She funds those." Elara stared at him. "You remembered that?" "Of course I did," he said. "You said you wanted to paint a collection based on cities that change faster than people. I haven't stopped thinking about it." She didn't know what to say to that. Holden stepped closer. "Let me open a door, Elara." "You don't have to walk through it, but you deserve to have it open." She nodded slowly. "Okay." They moved through the crowd again, this time with her hand resting lightly in his. Every few steps, someone stopped him offering congratulations, pitching ideas, trying to draw him into future plans. But each time, Holden politely redirected, never letting go of her. Eventually, they found the woman Miranda Shaw, head of the Shaw Foundation. She wore a satin wrap in deep plum and carried herself like she owned the room. Holden introduced them, stepping back just enough to give Elara the spotlight. "I'm a freelance illustrator," Elara said, her voice steady, "but I've been developing a portfolio on modern displacement, how cities repurpose themselves and force artists to adapt. I want to create an immersive exhibit." Miranda's expression sharpened with interest. "Have you shown your pieces publicly?" "Only in smaller regional galleries," Elara said, "but I have a digital catalog." "Send it to me," Miranda said. "I like your angle, it's relevant." "And emotional," Elara blinked. "Thank you, I will." Holden waited until Miranda drifted away before speaking. "You crushed that," Elara turned to him, heart pounding. "I didn't expect that. You should." They stood together beneath the chandelier, the light fracturing above them. He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Why are you really here tonight?" she asked. "Not just the gala, the campus, the alumni weekend. Why now?" Holden's breath hitched. "Because I thought maybe I could remember who I was before I sold myself to the highest bidder. And then I saw you, and suddenly all I wanted was to be the version of me you actually liked." Elara's throat tightened. "You don't have to be anyone else." "I know," he said, "but when I'm with you, I want to be better anyway." She looked down at her hands, then back up. "You're not the only one who wondered what might have happened if things had gone differently. Maybe this time," Holden said, "we stop wondering." And for the first time since they'd seen each other again, she didn't look away. Holden adjusted the watch on his wrist as he waited by the curb, the low hum of traffic filling the quiet space between him and the valet stand. The night after the gala had bled into morning, and now, with the sun beginning to dip behind the west wing of the campus, he stood outside the brick art building somewhat out of place in his charcoal sweater and pressed slacks, but determined not to let that matter. The door creaked open and Elara stepped out, her arms filled with rolled canvas, a small paint-splattered duffel slung over her shoulder. She paused when she saw him, lifting one eyebrow but not slowing. "I thought you said you had meetings this afternoon," she said, adjusting the strap of her bag. "I canceled them." "You canceled meetings," she repeated, looking genuinely surprised. "Are you feeling okay?" "Don't make it sound so dramatic," he said, taking the bag from her shoulder without asking. "You said you were finishing your last piece for the fellowship submission. I wanted to see it." She hesitated, her arms tightening briefly around the rolls of canvas. "It's not finished." "Let me see it anyway." Elara studied him for a long beat, then motioned with her chin. "Fine, but you're carrying everything?" They walked back inside the building, the old linoleum floors echoing under their steps. Her studio was tucked into the far end of the second floor, a small space filled with natural light and the scent of turpentine. Holden stepped inside and took a moment, letting his eyes scan the walls. Paintings leaned against every surface. Stark lines, bold colors, the kind of work that made you pause and stare. Cities twisted into abstract forms, people fading into the background. It was raw and unfiltered, and nothing like the curated perfection that filled his office walls. Elara unrolled the largest canvas on the easel. Her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the edges. "This one's called Inheritance," she said quietly. It was a skyline, but fractured. The buildings looked like they were crumbling into the street, while a single figure stood at the center, facing away, cloaked in grays and deep oranges. Holden stepped closer, She's walking into the chaos, he said. But she isn't scared. No, Elara said, folding her arms. She thinks if she walks far enough, she'll build something new. Holden didn't speak for a moment. You ever think about moving back here? Elara asked, surprising him. Not just for a weekend, I mean actually coming back. He turned toward her. To Emory, to the city, to something slower, something that doesn't require a boardroom and a quarterly report. Holden leaned on the edge of the table. I wouldn't know what to do with myself. You say that like it's a bad thing. He rubbed a hand along his jaw. I built a life that only works if I stay in motion. If I stop, it all falls apart. Maybe it needs to, she said, meeting his gaze. Maybe that's the point. Holden looked away, his eyes catching on a sketch pinned to the wall. It was smaller than the others, just a pencil drawing. A man sitting alone on a bench, his shoulders hunched forward, his hands clasped like he was trying to hold something together. He recognized himself instantly. You drew this, he said. 2 days after you left, Elara said. I was angry, then I was sad, then I stopped trying to label it. He turned back to her. I didn't know how much I'd left behind. You didn't ask. Silence fell between them, heavier this time. Come with me, Holden said suddenly. Elara blinked. Where? My place, just for the night. I have a penthouse in the city. You should see what I've built. She tilted her head. You want me to see your empire. I want you to see what I've been hiding behind. Elara didn't answer right away. She walked to the window, her arms crossed as she looked out across the campus. The bell tower chimed behind them, soft and distant. I'm not good at pretending things are casual, she said. If I go, it's not just to look at your view. I'm not asking you to pretend anything. She turned around, her face unreadable. Then I'll pack a bag. Holden didn't let his relief show. He just nodded and stepped back, giving her space to gather her things. The ride into the city was quiet but not tense. She sat beside him in the back of his car, her fingers idly tracing the stitching on the leather seat. He didn't fill the silence. He let it stretch, comfortable in a way he hadn't expected. When they arrived, the doorman greeted him by name, holding the door with a nod. Elara didn't comment on the marble floors or the private elevator. She didn't have to. Her eyes said enough. The penthouse opened into a wide, open-concept space with 20-foot windows and a view that swept across the skyline. Holden dropped his keys on the entry table and glanced back. Well, Elara stepped forward, walking slowly through the living room past the art-lined hallway, her gaze lingering on the details, the exposed beams, the custom bookshelf that stretched to the ceiling, the minimalist kitchen with brushed steel countertops. It's beautiful, she said. Too quiet most days. She turned to face him. You live here alone, he nodded. Always have. She walked to the edge of the window, her arms folded loosely. It doesn't feel like you. Holden raised an eyebrow. What does feel like me? Something messier, she said. Something with paint on the floor and coffee cups in the sink, he laughed. I'm not that far gone. You're not gone at all, she said softly. You just forgot how to live outside the spotlight, and you'd remind me. No, she said. But I could be the reason you remember. Holden crossed the room slowly. I've had 1,000 people tell me who I should be. You're the first person who's ever asked who I am. I didn't ask, she said, her voice catching. I already knew. He reached for her hand, pulling her gently toward him. I don't want another 12 years to go by, he said. I don't want to wake up and realize I missed the only chance that ever mattered. Elara looked up at him, her fingers tightening in his. Then stop running, she said. I already have. He kissed her, and this time neither of them disappeared. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Holden's penthouse, casting long golden lines across the hardwood floor. Elara stood barefoot in the kitchen, still wearing his oversized button-down from the night before, her hair loosely tied back. She reached for the French press and poured herself a cup of coffee, then leaned against the counter, watching the city stir beneath them. Holden joined her moments later, tugging a navy sweater over his head as he padded across the floor. He kissed her temple in quiet greeting, then grabbed a mug for himself. I have to fly to Chicago tomorrow, he said, blowing lightly on the coffee. Board meeting. It was supposed to be last week, but I pushed it. Elara didn't look away from the skyline. How long? 2 days, tops, she nodded once. You used to stay in cities like that for weeks. I used to think staying meant slowing down, he said. Now I know it means paying attention, she turned to him. And when you're back, then I want to show you something. She raised an eyebrow. Not here, he added. Back at Emory, but it needs a little work first. Elara narrowed her eyes. You're not turning the library into a co-working space, are you? He laughed. No, but close. She sipped her coffee, watching him over the rim of the mug. Why do I get the feeling you're planning something ridiculous? Because I am, he said. But not in the way you think. By late afternoon, he was gone. The silence left behind was different this time, not hollow, but expectant. Elara stayed another night in the penthouse, sketching by the window while the city pulsed beneath her. The next morning, she packed her things and returned to Emory, unsure what to expect but certain that something had shifted. 2 days passed. On the third, she received a call from a number she didn't recognize. When she answered, a woman with a clipped British accent introduced herself as Holden's assistant and informed her that a car would be arriving at precisely 6:30 to take her to a private campus event. What kind of event? Elara asked. I believe, Mr. Keller preferred it be a surprise. At 6:30 sharp, a sleek black SUV pulled up to her apartment. The driver opened the door without a word and handed her a small envelope. Inside was a single card with handwritten script, where something you can paint in. She laughed under her breath, changed into a pair of paint-splattered jeans and a worn linen blouse, and climbed inside. The car wound through the familiar streets of the college town, then turned toward a part of campus she hadn't visited in years. When it stopped near the edge of the old fine arts complex, she stepped out and immediately saw him. Holden stood beneath a temporary canopy, sleeves rolled to his elbows, jeans and a white t-shirt covered in flecks of color. Behind him, the old greenhouse abandoned since before they graduated had been entirely restored. The glass panes gleamed under the setting sun, and inside, canvas-covered easels and long work tables were visible through the transparent walls. What is this? She asked, walking toward him. It's your studio, Holden said. If you want it, she blinked. My what? I bought the building from the university, leased the land. It was going to be torn down, but I made them a better offer. Elara stepped forward, her heart pounding. You rebuilt the greenhouse? I remember you said you used to sneak in here to draw when you needed to clear your head, said it was the only place that felt alive even in winter. She stepped inside slowly, taking in the space. The interior smelled faintly of lemon oil and fresh sawdust. The windows had been cleaned until they sparkled. Sunlight spilled across polished concrete floors. Along the back wall, deep wooden drawers had been installed for storing supplies. Everything was designed with artists in mind. I didn't want to give you gallery space in someone else's world, Holden said behind her. I wanted you to have your own. She turned to him, speechless. There's more, he added. I set up a grant through the Keller Foundation for local artists, students, graduates. Anyone trying to find their footing. He hesitated. Named it after you. She shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. You did all this in 3 days. I've had the idea since the gala, he said. I just needed a reason to pull the trigger. Elara walked back to him, her eyes bright. You built something that matters. I want to build more, he said, reaching for her hand. With you, her breath caught. Are you saying I'm not going back to New York, he said. I already transferred my shares to the board. I'll stay on as advisor, but I'm stepping down as CEO. It's time, Elara stared at him. You're walking away from the company. I'm walking toward something better. She swallowed hard. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything yet, he said, pulling a ring box from his pocket. Just listen. Her lips parted as he opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold band, set with a single sapphire deep and blue as twilight. I loved you before I even knew what love was, Holden said. And I've spent every year since trying to outrun that feeling because I thought I needed to prove something first. But the only thing I want to prove now is that I'm all in, every day, forever. Tears slid down her cheeks, but she was smiling. I don't care about the ring, she whispered. I know, he said. I don't care about the building, the foundation, the penthouse. I know that too. I care that you're here. I'm not going anywhere. Elara nodded once and reached for him. Then yes. He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit like it had always belonged there. The sun dipped behind the glass panes, staining the room in orange and gold. Outside, the town began to light up, unaware of the promise just made inside that greenhouse. They stayed there long after the light faded, painting side by side beneath the stars, and when they finally left, it was as partners in love and life, and in everything they'd once left behind. This was not a return, it was a beginning. The chapel was tucked behind a grove of old oak trees near the edge of campus, a place most students never noticed unless they were seeking quiet or solitude. Today, it was neither. The wooden doors were open wide, letting in the late summer breeze that carried the scent of honeysuckle and sun-warmed grass. Inside, the pews were filled with familiar faces, and every seat held a white gardenia tied with a silk ribbon. Holden stood at the front of the aisle, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, wearing a custom gray suit that had taken 3 fittings to get right. His tie was slightly crooked, a detail his best man, a childhood friend flown in from Boston, had tried and failed to fix minutes before. But Holden hadn't cared. Nothing felt out of place when he knew who was walking toward him. Music shifted and the crowd stood. Elara stepped into view, her gown simple and off-shoulder, the fabric falling around her like water. Her hair was swept back with a small pin shaped like a crescent moon, and in her hands she carried a bouquet of wildflowers from the greenhouse where they'd first said yes. As she walked, her eyes never left his. When she reached him, Holden took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm before turning to face the officiant. The ceremony was short. Neither of them believed in long speeches or borrowed phrases. Instead, they'd written their own vows, quiet and honest. "I spent too long building a future I didn't want," Holden said, his voice steady. "But then you showed me what it could be, and now, whatever we build, I want it to be ours." Elara's voice caught, but she didn't falter. "You didn't rescue me, you didn't fix me, you just saw me. And now I see you too." When the rings were exchanged and the final words spoken, he kissed her like they were already home. Afterward, the guests gathered beneath strings of lights hung between the trees, sipping champagne and dancing barefoot on the grass. The reception was less a party and more a gathering of people who had known them before they knew each other again. Miranda Shaw raised a toast, lifting her glass with a knowing smile. "To the artist who taught us to see and the man who finally learned how." Laughter rippled through the crowd, followed by applause. Later, Elara pulled Holden aside near the fringe of the trees, where a lantern hung low over a bench carved with the words, "Keep what matters." "I forgot this was here," she said, brushing her fingers across the inscription. "You pointed it out to me once," Holden said. "Senior year, you said it was the only advice that ever made sense. I didn't think you were listening. I never stopped." She leaned into him, her voice soft. "Do you ever miss the noise?" He shook his head. "Not once." They stayed there until the music faded and the last of the guests trickled away. Then they walked back through campus hand in hand, past the library, the quad, and the greenhouse now named Delgado Studio, the plaque freshly mounted and gleaming in the moonlight. Inside, the space had been left untouched from the last workshop she'd hosted. Easels stood waiting, a few brushes still soaking in jars. Elara walked slowly to the center and turned to face him. "I want to open the studio twice a week to walk-ins," she said. "People who don't think they're artists, people who just want to feel something, no pressure." "No critiques," Holden smiled. "You don't need permission from me." "I know," she said, "but I like telling you anyway." He crossed the room to her, pulling her into his arms. "I'll be here every Thursday. I might not paint, but I'll bring the coffee. You'll paint." "Eventually." "I'll try," he said, brushing his lips across her forehead. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the ivy along the greenhouse walls. Inside, the two of them stood still, wrapped in a quiet that no longer felt like absence but completion. Months passed. The Delgado studio became a cornerstone of the community. High school students came to sketch after class. Retired professors stopped by with watercolors and thermoses of tea. Even Holden, true to his word, showed up every Thursday, even the week he broke his wrist attempting to help with a sculpture installation. He now had 2 paintings on the far back wall. Neither were very good. She never let him take them down. They moved into a craftsman-style home not far from campus. It had a wraparound porch and a reading nook that Elara filled with plants. Holden converted the garage into an office, though he rarely used it for more than writing grant proposals or mentoring early-stage startups. They took weekend trips to nearby cities, not to escape but to explore. Elara kept a new sketchbook for each place they visited. Holden kept the train tickets and museum passes in a drawer he labeled proof of living. One afternoon, Elara stood in the kitchen, her hand resting on the curve of her stomach. "You're quiet," Holden said, stepping into the room. She looked up at him, eyes glowing with something that looked like awe. "I think they kicked for the first time." Holden crossed to her instantly, dropping to his knees and pressing his ear to her belly. "Say something again." "Maybe they like your voice," she laughed, threading her fingers through his hair. "You're going to be ridiculous, aren't you, completely?" Their child arrived in early spring, just as the first flowers bloomed around the greenhouse. They named her Mira after the artist and the star. She had Elara's eyes and Holden's stubbornness. For the first few weeks, they barely left the house. They didn't need to. Everything they cared about was already here. Years later, on a quiet evening, Holden stood in the doorway of the studio, watching Elara teach Mira how to hold a brush. The little girl's brow furrowed with concentration, her tongue peeking out like she was solving the world's most important puzzle. "You're making a rainbow," Elara said gently. "No," Mira corrected. "It's a city." "But it's still growing." Holden stepped inside, wrapping an arm around his wife's waist. "I think she takes after you," he murmured. Elara leaned into him, her voice warm. "I think she takes after us." They stayed there as the light faded, the 3 of them surrounded by color, by warmth, by the quiet blooming of a life fully chosen. And for the first time, Holden Keller knew with absolute certainty he hadn't built his future, he'd found it.